Mr. Miliband for his statement. And now I'll give the floor to Mr. Manuel Patrouillard, Director General of Humanity and Inclusion, NGO.
Merci.
Thank you, Minister, for this invitation to my organization to speak here today about the impacts of protecting humanitarian workers. We have been operating for more than 35 years now in some 100 countries, and 21 are in a situation of conflict. And for us, this is an ongoing concern to ensure the safety of our personnel as well as that of our partners, of course. So much has been said, of course, about the importance of specifically ensuring protection for humanitarian workers. I think it has been said that they are often exposed and often targeted, which is completely unacceptable. I think that we also must emphasize here in this room that protecting humanitarian personnel is an essential precondition to maintaining access to essential services for populations affected in a crisis. I want to highlight 3 threats that have serious impacts for organizations such as ASHI who work on the ground. The first is the threat of the political instrumentalization of humanitarian aid. Assistance that is provided should be subject to no other imperative than the humanitarian one. Combating terrorism, issues of sovereignty, and confusion between military and humanitarian objectives. None of those agendas should put into question the absolute necessity of providing neutral, impartial, and independent assistance. We have said here that states are responsible for the application of international law on their territory. It was also recalled that the Security Council plays a key role in promoting and ensuring protection for humanitarian principles, particularly in crisis areas. So, of course, some of these principles might seem a bit theoretical, but they are absolutely crucial to ensuring continued access to essential services and, of course, in order to prevent humanitarian workers from becoming a target. The second threat concerns risks tied to explosive devices, which account for some 90% of civilian victims when they're used in populated areas. You recalled, Mr. Minister, as well as certain others, the recent deaths in Yemen and the untold destruction of healthcare facilities in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the intensity with which urban areas are targeted and subjected to attacks increase risks for civilians and for humanitarian works in a frightening manner. This has a devastating effect, both for first responders, but also for providing assistance, for access to essential services, and for all, including long-term, due to the contamination that ensues. We therefore expect the international community to be firm in the face of the use of such large impact explosive weapons in urban areas in line with the Secretary General's call. Moreover, anti-mine action, including education on the risks, decontamination, and assistance to victims, must be seen as an integral part of humanitarian response plans. The third threat regards specific risks to which local staff are subjected, staff of NGOs, whether these are international or local NGOs. They are at the heart of the humanitarian response, and they are the best positioned to ensure the uninterrupted, continuous nature of this assistance, which I already addressed. During the conflict and post-conflict, when the vulnerability of populations remains very high, they therefore face specific risks related to their humanitarian mandate. And I think we have already mentioned that the fact that they're wounded, but also the fact that they're forced to be displaced, subject to arbitrary arrests, and face prison sentences up to 12 years in some places, as well as assassinations. And they must be protected, especially when the areas where they work change. The control over those areas change, which happens often during conflicts, and enable them to work continue working if they so choose. The international community bears a collective responsibility to strengthen protection for that personnel, as the provision of assistance is on everyone's agenda. Providing means of protection as well as evacuation is something that needs to be addressed immediately in parallel in line with what is being done for human rights workers. And finally, to conclude, I urge a solemn appeal to all of those here. Attacks against humanitarian and medical personnel must end. The Security Council and the entirety of the international community must mobilize to denounce and systematically condemn such attacks and put an end to them. The Security Council must support the establishment of specific responses and solutions beyond those that already exist to strengthen the protection of humanitarian workers, and to do this in two ways. First, by establishing an independent mechanism that reports to the Secretary General and which is tasked with identifying and recording attacks against humanitarian and medical personnel, ensuring follow-up to those attacks and putting an end to the culture of impunity. Second, by facilitating the accounting of the specific impacts that humanitarian workers face, both as part of efforts to protect civilians, but also to reflect this in any ceasefire, peace, and reconciliation agreements. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank Mr. Patrouillard for his statement. On all of our behalf, I would like to thank all of the panelists for their very clarifying statements. We now have around